the Year at the Auckland Bioengineering Institute. I am very honored to introduce Dame Professor Charmian O'Connor. I just printed out her Wikipedia page, and I'm going to read out the main points. It's quite long, so I can't read them all. So I will read the main points only. So Dame Professor O'Connor was born in Woodville, 4th of August, 1937. Was educated at Hastings High School and then Auckland Girls Grammar, and then she went on to Auckland University to study chemistry, graduating Bachelor of Science in 57, Master of Science in 58, and PhD in 63. And she was appointed as a lecturer in chemistry in 58, rising to the rank of professor in 1986. And becoming Auckland's first female professor of chemistry. And she authored and co-authored more than 300 scientific papers in referee journals, and her research focused on mechanisms and kinetics of reactions involving biologically active compounds. And in 1973, she was conferred the degree of Doctor of Science by the University of Auckland, and she becoming the first woman in New Zealand to be awarded a BSc. And she had lots of administrative roles at the university, such as inaugural assistant vice chancellor, equal employment opportunity and staff development from 87 to 98, and then deputy vice chancellor in 94. She also served as a member of Ministerial Advisory Group for Science and Technology and a National Commission for UNESCO. And she served on the councils of a number of educational institutions, including Manukau Institute of Technology, Unitec, and Unitec. So, and then she was, in 1987, Queen's Birthday Honors. Dame Professor O'Connor was appointed as a Commander of Order of British Empire for service to chemistry, education, and community. And she became a Dame Companion of New Zealand Order of Merit for services to chemistry and education in 2018 Queen's Birthday Honors. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Professor Dame O'Connor.
Thank you, Vicky, and thank you for your committee for inviting me. I'm very honoured. Kia ora, koutou katoa. I haven't actually prepared anything because I'm hoping to make this seminar interactive. I've been around a long time, so I think I can answer a lot of your questions. But I thought I would start off with saying something about, can you hear me?
Yes.
And I apologise for sitting, but I'm not very good standing so I have to sit. I thought I'd say something about why I became a scientist. And in my case, I think it's very much the melding of the dichotomy between culture, between nurture and nature. My great-grandparents on my mother's side all came to New Zealand in the 1850s, escaping from the potato famine in Ireland, and all ended up on the west coast. The men as miners, and the women just, who were few and far between, married often 2 or 3 times because their husbands died in the mines. Now, my grandfather was responsible for bringing up the men in the cages from the gold mines in Reefton. Reefton got electricity, the first place in the Southern Hemisphere, in 1888. And so he was responsible for a very stressful job for bringing the men up from the cages from the depths of the mine. And then in the early 20th century, the gold started disappearing and Reefton started converting to coal. And so my grandfather then went with his 3 children by horse and dray, across the Alps, and started to set up the power station in Hastings. My mother was 12 at the time, and she went to the Napier Polytech, where she learned bookkeeping and typing and technical drawing. But she thought that wasn't going to be enough for her, so she got private coaching, and she learned a little bit of French and a little bit of mathematics, and she matriculated so that she could go to university in Wellington. And this is in the early days of women becoming educated in a tertiary institution. She was in a class of about 3 women. She did a degree in English, she went to training college, and she graduated with a BA and then went teaching. While she was in Wellington, she met my father, who was a little bit senior to her. He'd been at training college, he also had a BA, and he chased promotion around little country schools. Now they got married, and the moment women got married in the teaching profession, they weren't allowed to work. That was just absolutely a no-no. So women, they had the vote, but they weren't allowed to teach. So she was in a little country area, and she would coach some of the children of the rich farmers, and until they were old enough to come to boarding school in Auckland. And then during the war years, my father was promoted to Raurimu District High School. Now that was quite a big school, it was 4 teachers. My father taught all the high school. There were 2 teachers in the standards and 1 in the primers. And I was 2, 3, 4, no playmates, lived on a little cottage on a farm, and in order to occupy me, my mother taught me reading, writing, arithmetic, and so when I started school, I effectively started in Standard 1 and missed the primers. We then went to Hastings when I was 7, and I went through all of Hastings Central School when my father was headmaster, and then for the first year and a half at Hastings High School, then transferred to, my father then became an inspector of schools, and I transferred to Auckland Girls Grammar School, where I did Latin, French, English, loved Latin and French, was very good at them. There wasn't really any science. The science teacher had a degree in home science, and didn't really know any chemistry. She had a bad accident in the 6th form, year 12, and didn't teach thereafter. So occasionally a training college student would come in for a week, and she had stage 1 chemistry and do a little bit of chemistry. The maths teacher didn't know how to use a slide rule, and when I sat the scholarship examination at the end of the year, there were all these Greek symbols. I'd never seen Greek symbols in maths before. What was all this trigonometry and calculus about? Anyway, I decided at the age of 16 that I would go to university and do a science degree, and if it didn't work out, I could always do an arts degree in Latin and French. And I went to university and found my nirvana. Just loved the labs, loved mixing things, loved making colours, loved tipping things in and using a burette and just sort of adding quarter drops. And I did extremely well. So my parents didn't know anything about a science degree, didn't know any scientists. There weren't any jobs for women scientists. Women couldn't apply for Rhodes, Shell, BP, Rutherford. None of these were available. So I was the sole woman in my master's class in a class of 30, and still doing very well. The boys used to like pairing up with me to do experiments because I was actually quite good at the practical work. And then I became a junior lecturer and did my PhD, rather slowly, and then went to a postdoc. Now I'll talk more about the postdoc and the opportunities for that later. But I think that the opportunity for me to become a scientist was a mixture of nature and nurture. Obviously the genes were there through my grandfather, and probably through my mother as well, although she was never given the opportunity. And the nurture was certainly through my family, that I could, so darling could do what she wanted to do as long as she did well, and if she wanted to do a science degree, that was fine. There wasn't enough money for me to go to Dunedin to do a doctorate that my brother was doing, but anything that was available in Auckland was absolutely fine. And so that's how I became a scientist. It was pure stubbornness on my part and actual support from the lecturers whom I had. And the next thing I want to address is the question that has been asked a number of times from you. How is it possible to be an academic and be a mother? How many are interested in that answer? The answer is, it is extremely difficult. Nobody's going to give it to you on a platter and say this is how you do it. When I became a mother, there were no childcare facilities in Auckland at the universities. There were private childcare centres, and my children went for a few hours to a couple of childcare centres. And I still think it's true, you cannot be an academic and a mother without two of the following. You either need a very supportive parent or a very supportive partner, and you need money, because effectively you've got to spend what you earn on paying for the childcare so that you can have a life. You're not going to get promotion by taking your daughter to ballet school. You've got to have your own life, you've got to get on with your own work, and you know it's not going to last forever, but you've got to pay for support so that the children are not disadvantaged. And I don't believe that sending a child to childcare is in any way disadvantageous to them at all. When I went overseas on my two sabbatical leaves, the first time I had my 2-year-old son, and I paid for an Irish nanny who used to arrive at 8 o'clock in the morning and leave at 6 o'clock. And if I were a minute late, she would be standing at the door with her hat on and her gloves on, ready to walk out the door. She did nothing by way of meal preparation, washing for the baby, nothing. All that she did was take him on an outing in the morning, put him to sleep in the afternoon because I liked him to be awake in the evening, and she would pray, and I would have to get his meals ready for the week, and my husband's and my meals. Now, in fairness, I did not have a supportive childcare husband, and so a lot of it was was left to me. But I do know a lot of academics who have enormously supportive partners. And I think and in my case, it was my mother, because my parents allowed me to go overseas, they allowed me to go to conferences, they allowed me to be home late if necessary, so that I could go to a seminar, and they did everything in their power to support me so that I could do my academic work. And as I say, the other thing that you need is be prepared to spend most of your salary supporting your children until they get to the stage where they can go to school, and the support will be less. The second time I went overseas, by then I was divorced, I had 2 children, and I went to Texas A&M University, which was a university geared for the slightly more mature student. It was agricultural and mechanical, a lot of army students there, and around a huge campus, and all around the campus there were childcare centres associated with all the Bible studies groups, so Methodist, Baptist, Episcopalian. My little girl went to a Baptist school. They wouldn't allow her to go until she was wouldn't wee in the bed at lunchtime. That was a bit of a mission actually, because she was very determined that she wasn't going to stay dry, and she would go to the toilet, and she would come out and she'd wash her hands, and then go and get into bed, go to sleep in wet bed. So I had a period of a week at home with probably punishment that would not be entirely approved of in these days, but we got there because I had a job to do. She had to go behave herself at childcare, and my son was at school. So that's how I managed with young children. Later on, when I did become the Equity Pro-Vice Chancellor, Assistant Vice Chancellor, one of the first things I did was establish the childcare creches up in Park Road and the Kahangoreo, because I could see that that was one of the things that was holding back women from being able to have academic positions, that they simply could not get their children taken care of within the precincts of the university, and it was too difficult for them. Now, as I say, I'd like to make this interactive, and if you want to ask questions and question me, please feel free to do it. And while I go through, if you don't interrupt me, I'll keep on talking and we'll have question time at the end. But does anybody want to ask a question on anything I've said now?
Excuse me, I was just wondering, did you get a lot of support to establish those children's centres here? Or was it
Colin Maiden was the Vice-Chancellor. He appointed me as Assistant Vice-Chancellor, Equal Opportunities and Staff Development. It was the first such position in any tertiary institute in New Zealand. I had no budget, but Trudy McNaughton was the first Equal Opportunities Officer for the university, so she and I worked together very closely at the beginning. And whenever we had a good idea, which had a good business plan behind it, and we could prove that it was going to be for the benefit of the university, it got the full support of the Vice-Chancellor and the Council. So I can't praise Sir Colin enough for his foresight in setting up the EO office, and then for supporting Trudy and me at the beginning in what our ideas were. Without them, it wouldn't have been possible. There was one over here.
So it's clear that the childcare issues is a real barrier to women making advances as an academic and as a career. Where do you think the most significant barriers are now?
I think childcare is still one of them, because I think, if they're going to childcare, you've got to pay for it, it's expensive. And childcare only lasts for a certain portion of the day. You've got to go home and you've still got the children for about another 18 hours a day, when maybe you're trying to write a paper and they're crying, or they've got colic, or they've got something. I think it is still a huge distraction to progress in academic work, and you've got to be extraordinarily strong-minded and strong-willed and think, I am going to get this paper written, even if it means I'm going to stay up till 2 o'clock in the morning to do it. The other thing that I think that you've got to do is give all credit to the professional staff of the university. This university would not run if it weren't for the professional staff, the technicians, the glass blowers, the mechanical engineers, the electricians. I mean, I was not mechanically minded, but I ran a lot of instrumentation, and when the instrumentation did not work, which it frequently didn't because it was always old, you did a plea to the technical staff and they would come and fix it. And I think, and I still think this is true, that the professional staff in the university are poorly paid compared with what they could get out in industry, that they're not always valued as much as they should be, but the university wouldn't run without them, and I think that they should be more acknowledged than they are, because I used to put their names on my academic papers, because often they contributed a lot to the ideas that I had. And I think it's not always true in some of the faculties, but my granddaughter went through Faculty of Fine Arts last year, and she was the same thing, that she couldn't have done it without the technical people helping her hang things high up on walls, and with the OSH regulations now that she wasn't allowed to stand on a ladder, she would have to get a technician to stand on the ladder for her to hang something.
Question, I'm thinking of my enjoyment of science, especially during high school years, where I would get one of the things which were health and safety now, I just would never get anywhere near it, and you just mentioned OSH now as well. Do you think that with the current sort of more recent environment of the thing has to be carefully done this way, and one's got to do this, and one's got to do that in certain ways, rather than just the freedom to be creative? Do you think that's impact on up-and-coming scientists?
I think one of the bad things that happened was that Second Tech, as it was then, now AUT, stopped teaching technicians, because the technicians learned how to make the instruments work. They didn't know all the theory. The academics knew all the theory, but they didn't actually know what wire to put where and which one went. And once Second Tech, had probably changed the name several times since then, stopped teaching the technical degrees, and academics started doing the professional jobs in blood and you had to have a PhD virtually to be able to work in a warehouse that sold scientific instruments. I think we lost some of the skills of people who were actually very good with their hands and didn't necessarily want to do a degree.
Hi there. We have tremendous difficulty in maintaining funding for technicians. Can you hear me?
No.
Okay.
No problem.
We have tremendous difficulty in maintaining funding for technicians. And the reason being, but they do, and I'm absolutely convinced, keep your laboratory producing constantly very well, maintaining protocols that students might come along and just change a bit, and that protocol doesn't work as well for there on in. However, it is I'm facing having to probably give notice to technicians that I've had for 25 years working for me because there is not enough funding. And the university is not helping in this way at all at maintaining them.
You have my sympathy. Let me tell you, technicians tend to stay at the university because they like the environment, they like the work, they like the people they work with,
Yeah.
and they will stay here for a lesser fund of money, or that was certainly true when I was available.
And also, if there's a real problem in medical science, where I am too, to actually have another job for them to go to, because the
They
pharmaceutical
keep
companies...
rewriting your job description, and you don't fit the new job description because it's got something in it that you're not qualified to do.
And also the university administration are changing things left, right and
Well,
centre.
I mean, I can't say too much, but you have my sympathies because I think this university and any university would not survive were it not for the technical expertise.
Well, I
that is
think we're going
available.
to have a decrease in good science that's coming out if we have to get rid of our technicians. Certainly the science coming out of my laboratory will be less than perfect. Anyway, it's hot on my mind at the moment.
Can I just say that in ABI we value our technical staff extraordinarily highly.
I know,
Yeah.
Peter.
But maybe that's partly because we're mainly engineers, so we're closer to.
Yes. But I think you'll find that in some faculties, some departments, the professional staff are not always valued as they should be. I mean, I've known technical staff leave because one member of staff has said something inappropriate to them and they've thought, I don't need to take this, I can go down the road and double my salary. But others have come back from outside where they've got much more money and they've come back into the chemistry department because they actually love the environment and love the work. So I think it's horses for courses, but I think particularly women who may not be as experienced in workshop protocols as their brothers, certainly I wasn't, depend much more on technicians.
Can I take you back just a little bit? I'm fascinated with, what you've spoken about, and I guess what we've been talking about is lots of difficulties that have been presented, particularly for parents. But what do you have a good sense in your career as to really where your inner drive came from? Did you have key mentors? You had enablers, your family supported you and so on, but do you have a good feel for where your
The
drive came from?
best academic supports were my academic mentors, men. I worked in a department of almost entirely males, I was one female among a class of 30 male students, but I had support from consecutive heads of department, from my PhD supervisors, and when I went overseas on my study leaves, I had enormous support from the men with whom I went to work. And that was the other thing I was going to say. Although it's hard, and although you've got children, and although you've got family, you've got to establish an international network of colleagues and mentors early on in your career, because they are going to be your friends for life and your contacts for life. Now, in my case, I went first overseas in 1963. The next big period I had overseas was 1967. And then that was a bit out of my field, so it didn't yield me quite as much by way of international friends. The really successful one was 1972, where I went on my own with 2 children, and I went to lots of conferences in the United States. I was adopted by the Australians. I was the only New Zealander in the group at Texas A&M, but there were a lot of Australians, and in particular there was an Australian engineering professor who adopted essentially around him all of the Australian students who were there, and I became in loco Australian for that period of time. It was one of the happiest periods of my life because I had babysitters, and most of them weren't married, but they were quite happy to spend the evening looking after my children. I went off to conferences, and a couple of them would come and stay with the children. And through the Gordon conferences in particular that I went to during that period, and the subsequent Gordon conferences that I went to as a result of that 1972 leave, set the forum for international contacts that lasts to this day. At one Gordon conference I went to in New Hampshire, I sat in the bus coming back from New Hampshire to Boston with a young Japanese scholar. And we talked about how he wanted to come to New Zealand and how lovely New Zealand was and how lovely Japan was. 2 weeks later, I got a phone call. "Hello, Charmian. I have booked my ticket to come to New Zealand. I will be there in 2 weeks. I will stay for 1 week." So I got him accommodation in an old government house. He gave a lecture in the department. Subsequently, I spent a period of 2 months as a Matsumi Fellow in his laboratory. I sent students to him, he sent students to me. The Matsumi International Foundation is actually celebrating its 40th anniversary this year. It was built on the von Humboldt ideals. It was established in 1980. I went in 82. I sent a student from Switzerland there who was working with me. I sent him in 84. In 84, he sent a Taiwanese student who was working with him back to Japan. That Taiwanese student has subsequently sent a Nigerian student. And so we four are writing our book about 4 generations with the Matsumi Foundation. But it started with sitting in the bus next to a Japanese coming back from a Gordon conference, and through Junzo Tsurumoto, I subsequently went to Japan 15 times. Now, Junzo is dead, but I met lots of other people in Japan, and I am still collaborating scientifically with Professor Hirofumu Akabayashi at Nagoya Institute of Technology, who did brilliant science, but his English wasn't very good. And so I started to take over his writings and look up the literature and put his good science into something that could be published. And we've not missed a beat. We've published about 30 papers together since that time. So for me, and I've not been to Japan for about 20 years. I've not done any travelling for about that time, but it's very important when you're young to establish international contacts and keep them going. Now, at the beginning, it was by letters. Fax didn't even exist. It was by letters and by Christmas cards. And then then we would communicate by fax. And then it became by email. And now it's actually often easy to just talk on the phone. But it was hard work at the beginning to maintain it, but extraordinarily important, because it meant that that brings me into getting my personal chair. Marie Clay was the only female professor in the university. And in 1985, Pat Berquist was appointed to a personal chair in zoology. And the following year, Philippa Black in geology and I in chemistry were appointed to personal chairs in geology and chemistry. Now, you couldn't apply for a professorship in those days. The only way that you could become a professor was by applying for chair and head of department, or on the very rare occasions, being appointed to a personal chair. And to be appointed to a personal chair, it meant that several of your male colleagues, because they had to be male, that's all they were, suggested that you might become a holder of a personal chair, and you didn't know anything about this, of course. Your curriculum vitae and all your publications were sent to a bevy of international people overseas who wrote back to the academic committee as to whether you were worthy of becoming a holder of a personal chair. And we three scientists, and Marie Clay, Marie got hers, I think. I think Marie was appointed as chair and head of department, but Pat, Philippa and I were appointed to the personal chairs, and we were the only 4 women chairs in the university for 10 years. And another of the things that I brought in as Provost Chancellor Equity was that women could apply for promotion to professor. And so, and Colin Maiden again was very supportive of that he was trying to build the number of women professors up. Colin never knocked back any good idea that we had. But as I say, we never had a budget to do it. The people I was on promotions committee for a long time, and we had a budget to work to, and if somebody became a professor, the board, writing on the board, it was a bit like a stock exchange. You'd cross a bit off there and put a bit on there, and at the end of the day you had to balance the budget. So, but male professors are the most supportive people that we have in terms of equity. You've got a good male professor and you've got a soulmate.
I have a question about going into your international experience. Obviously, science is very international, but I see a lot of scientists become a professor at their university where they did their PhD. Why do you think people come back to that university to become a professor at their home university, so to speak? Why do you think people don't move out to the rest of the world as much to be a professor somewhere else?
With New Zealanders, it's very much the pull of New Zealand and family. At Texas A&M, where I had been on leave, I was offered a professorship to take on the teaching of 3,000 first-year students. I was quite young. I was about 34 years of age. I knew I could do the job, but my parents lived in New Zealand, and it was very much family pull that although I loved being at Texas A&M, it was one of the hardest years of my life because I was there with 2 children on my own, with no family support, no relatives, and I thought I was going to get that if I came back to New Zealand. So I think in many cases, New Zealand is a very big pull.
And is this mainly for women who have families, or do you think this is also for men?
I think it is, yes. I think family is a very big tie.
Yeah.
I mean, you'll find sometimes that you support your children till they're 16 and then they disappear and you don't see them again for decades. But they're still family.
What would you say has been your most rewarding position in your career?
Assistant Vice Chancellor and Staff Development and Equity, because in that position I was able to do so much for academics, male and female. I was able to introduce a good promotion scale for professional staff, for library staff. I was able to introduce that professional staff could go on leave as of right, which they'd never been able to before. Now, remember that these positions, we were Assistant Vice Chancellor or Assistant to the Vice Chancellor. There was discipline, research, academic. I was the first one in equity. These were add-ons to our professional life. We were full-time academics. We had a full-time teaching load. We had a full-time research load. We were paid 5% extra salary, which was not superannuable. So you got the 5% while you did the job, but it wasn't added on to superannuation. It was only after Colin Maiden went that they started to introduce these permanent positions and deans were in exactly the same position. Deans weren't paid. I'm not even sure that they got the 5%. But they were full-time academics. It was only once Colin went and the new hierarchy of Vice Chancellors came in, that Pro-Vice Chancellors, Deputy Vice Chancellors, and that tranche of top people became full-time bureaucrats and lost their. Now some, like Anne Summond, managed to maintain an academic focus. but a lot didn't. So it was, but for me, it was very rewarding because what it led on to when I retired was the establishment of the Kate Edgar Educational Charitable Trust. And I'll talk a little bit about that now. I've been a member of the Federation of University Women all my life. My mother had been a member. I joined at the age of 16. I'd always gone to meetings. I'd been on every committee position, working my way up the scale until the stage where I became New Zealand president. I led a New Zealand conference overseas. At one stage, I actually saved the International Federation because they wanted to put the fees up for the Americans and the Canadians, and I fought against it and allowed them to stay in at a lesser fee. Now, this was a minor save in that they left after a while anyway. But I could see what was happening in New Zealand was that people were, more women were working, people were living further and further out in the suburbs. They couldn't be bothered making effort to come into evening lectures. The attendance was getting worse and worse, and the branch was dying, essentially. So they ran on a very amateur basis a small business called Academic Dress Hire, which only serviced the staff of the University of Auckland. And it was all done on an amateur basis out of the annex at Old Government House. The first thing that I did was call a meeting of the branch members that existed. And this was one of the biggest meetings they'd had for a long time. They probably had maybe 50, 60 members go, and we had it in the basement of the cathedral. And I said, you're not getting helpers for academic dress hire. It's falling behind, the regalia's going down, you haven't got money to buy it. Let me take that regalia, we'll pay you a token amount for what the regalia's worth, and we'll establish an independent, professional, Kate Edgar Educational Charitable Trust, which will run as its business academic dress hire as a separate business. So this caused a lot of tension. People like Dame Dorothy Winston, of course, whose life had been in academic dress hire, was dead against it. They thought, you know, what's going to happen to us if you take our business away from us? Anyway, I won that round. So we established the independent Kate Edgar Trust, and we established an independent charitable trust. The following year, as I knew was going to happen, attendance at the branch got fewer and fewer. So I called another meeting, again in the basement of the cathedral, and I said, I think we should close the branch. This wasn't the first city in Auckland, in New Zealand, to close the branch. But I had enough experience of committee work and governance with the Royal Society, various committees down in Wellington, in Auckland, to know this was the way it was going to work. And so I moved that the branch close and that there would be a token sum given, and we would keep doing all the good things that the branch had done, like the memorial book, the Viva, the Women to Watch seminars, as long as people wanted them, which we did, and some of them kept going for about another 5 or so years. But we achieved everything that we promised we did. At that stage, when the branch closed, we were giving away about $70,000 a year in awards to University of Auckland students. Over the last few years, the Kate Edgar Educational Charitable Trust has given away over $600,000 a year to support women in education in all the tertiary institutes in Auckland. Auckland University still gets the bulk of it. AUT is getting more and more now because their academic standards are coming up. MIT and AUT get some, and we keep adding institutes to it who are well qualified for what they do. We've just added the College of Chiropractics because they've got rave reviews from NZQA for what they do. No matter what one might think about chiropractics, NZQA approves them in terms of the highest academic standards. So they can't apply for the top scholarships, but the little scholarships of $2,000 down the bottom, they can apply for those. And we have I chaired that trust for the first 13 years. I still chair the awards committee and have oversight of all the awards. So that I think, in answer to your question, my most the happiest appointment that I ever had was to be appointed Equity Vice Chancellor, because it allowed me then to do so much for so many people within the university and subsequently in education. And what I recently got the damehood for was in chemistry and education, and the education was essentially all to do with the Kate Edgar Trust. Then the other thing that I should say, do not start doing good works and being on committees and being proactive on committee work until you've got your career out of the way. Somebody said to me early on in my career, why aren't you doing this, and this? And I said, I will when I pass the bar in the senior lecturer stage. But until then, I'm concentrating on my academic work. And I did. And then once I got past the bar in the senior lecturer, thought, okay, I'm on my way now. I can afford to do other things for other people. But you've got to be selfish, because you can't be all things to all people. And primarily, your first responsibility has to be to yourself and your family. We've got about 5 minutes before we should wrap up. Any further questions?
Can I ask a question about chemistry, about where when you look in on chemistry from the outside, you see these four major divisions of organic, inorganic, analytic, and physical chemistry. Do you think, is that still the case, or is that disappearing?
They are still the core of all the things that surround it. Chemistry is the core science for all scientific disciplines. And you've got... We used to put a slide up. First lecture in stage 1 chemistry. Chemistry at the centre. And then all the branches going out. To biological sciences, to engineering, to computer science, to everywhere.
Where's physics in there?
Yeah.
Yes, physics was a branch. but without a knowledge of chemistry, I'm surprised. Do any of you watch The Chase? Any of you time watch The Chase? how many chemistry questions they don't know.
Yeah, that's true.
It's appalling. And even the chasers often don't know. The beast knows because he's got a degree in maths, and he knows some chemistry, but most of them don't. But what you need, I mean, physical chemistry has as one of its branches analytical chemistry. Analytical chemistry feeds into wine science, forensic science, and all the other things that depend on it. Organic chemistry feeds into microbiology, biochemistry, bioengineering for that matter. Anything that's got bio in it comes from organic chemistry. Inorganic chemistry is the chemistry of the substance of the earth. So anything that deals with the elements of the earth depends on a knowledge of chemistry.
This year is the 150th anniversary of the Midnight Table.
And it's changing. The latest Chemistry and Industry Journal had the latest version of it, which sort of goes around like a matrix. And very sadly, one of the people who's been most productive in talking about the history of the Mendeleev, the Professor in Wellington, died yesterday. Sorry, I should know. Not unexpected, probably. He'd had many heart attacks, but he had a lot to do with what's going on in chemistry in New Zealand at the moment. But yes, I think you might have all these subdisciplines, green chemistry and all these others, but they all depend on the core chemistries. And that's why I think Chemistry 101 and 102, the two basic core subjects, are important if you're going to go on to any other sciences.
I'm really glad on this.
Oh yeah, I was going to say, what would you say in the future would be the most relevant skills you see to be a scientist?
Most relevant?
Skills, or like characteristics to be a scientist.
Determination. Never leave putting off for tomorrow something that you can do today. I always made a point of leaving a clean desk so that everything that I could do today was answered. And I'm still somebody who answers my emails, pays my bills, when they come through. I'm efficient in terms of never leaving anything undone that I can do now, and I multitask, and I always have multitasked.
Okay, with that wise counsel, we can close this first seminar. Thank you very much for again, Professor O'Connor. She had a chest infection last week, still she was able to give this 1 hour talk. That was really amazing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vicky.